Yo guys, Punkrat with another video. I've covered this idea in a lot of videos that I've made in the past. The notion that WoW Classic isn't just a game about endgame and PvP. Adventure is a key aspect in WoW Classic, alongside the social aspect of the game of course. That dynamic social environment has a pretty symbiotic relationship with adventuring in general. With no flying mounts, there's tons of seemingly unattainable secret locations in the game. Despite this, WoW players throughout the history of the game have refused to bend to this challenge and have found clever ways to reach a lot of these locations. As a kid, I was obsessed with discovering secret locations within the game. This was a big reason why it took me 31 days played to reach level 60 in original vanilla, due to my passion for these adventures. Sadly enough, we might actually lose access to a lot of these secret zones with WoW Classic being implemented within the new game engine, but nonetheless, let's go through the list. Number 10 on the list, we've got the IRONFORGE Airfield and Old IRONFORGE. So number 10, I made 2 locations in fact, mainly because I had more than 10 locations for the whole list, and instead of doing honorable mentions at the end, I figured I would just put together some of them that are more closely linked in terms of proximity. IRONFORGE was home to some of the earlier awesome discoveries in the game from an adventure perspective. My first ever wall jumping adventure was to the top of IRONFORGE, where I was amazed by the IRONFORGE Airfield atop the city. If you've ever taken flight from IRONFORGE to Wetlands, you've definitely flown over this airbase and seen it for yourself. It was clearly added in the game as a piece of scenery during your Griffin ride, but eager adventurers ended up finding a way to scale up to the top of the mountains and get above IRONFORGE, fully experiencing the airfield for themselves. It's an awesome place with gnomish-style jet fighters, gnome engineers working on the planes, dwarven-style tanks like we've seen forever in WoW, a landing and takeoff strip with indicator lights alongside it, and the whole thing was surrounded by mountains and stone structures peering over, built within the mountaintops. Really cool location, and like I said, the first secret zone that I ever experienced in the game. Another spot in IRONFORGE which is quite well known is Old IRONFORGE. You got to this place by getting into this little nook in the wall, right in this little corner in the BG district in IRONFORGE, where you were able for some reason to duel players. I don't know why you're not supposed to be able to duel in main cities, but when in that duel, you could get blinded, polymorphed, or feared, and the CC pathing would get you right through the wall, leading you straight into, I guess it's like kind of a shrine of sorts under IRONFORGE, perched over the magma. I don't know how it's not like 200 degrees down there and you don't die from heat stroke or cook like a roasted chicken, but realism isn't a strong point in World of Warcraft. Nonetheless, it's a great treasure discovered in the original game, and I'm sure a lot of you vanilla fanboys remember it quite vividly. Coming in at number 9, we've got the Tower of QUEL'THALAS. This one is quite basic, but nonetheless cool. It's one of the easiest places to get to on the list as well. So if you go to the northern coast of Tirisfal Glades, you can follow the coastline east alongside the mountain range while hugging the ridgeline as close as possible to avoid fatigue timer. After swimming for a while, you finally get to what is commonly referred to as the Tower of QUEL'THALAS. It's, I guess, noted as a precursor to QUEL'THALAS. It's not really Eastern Plague Lands, it's kind of off that portion of the map. It's located on a part of the map which you can't highlight, and connected to the Blood Elf land in the north, QUEL'THALAS I guess, which hadn't been developed yet. It's also Elven style, so not necessarily Blood Elf style from what we know in later expansions, more of a Night Elf style, but still Elven I guess, and it was such an early time in Warcraft that maybe the Blood Elf style hadn't really been developed yet, or at least not within the game. Maybe that's just what they had at the time and they placed it there, who knows. It's pretty cool regardless. Just a nice remote location with an ivory tower, a dock alongside the shore, some ruins down at the other spot near the mountains. It's a pretty nice spot for hanging out, maybe having an in-game wedding at the dock arch, or maybe some duels, role-playing, you name it. It's a spot that I visited a long time ago, and I always remember it for some reason when thinking about cool spots for like a montage or anything specifically in the game for making videos. Number 8 on the list, we've got the South Sea Islands in Tanarus. A classic organic adventure from the original game, one of the first ever Easter egg zones discovered, the South Sea Islands are a sandy tropical paradise located off the south shore of Tanarus. If you come to the most southern point of Tanarus, where all these spiked-back turtles are seemingly mating, when you look off to the shore into the distance along the water, there's an outline of what seems to be a rocky island. The further you swim out from shore, there's certain parts of the sea that will trigger fatigue timer, although there's ways to get around that obstacle if you know what you're doing and make it across all the way to the island. There's 2 islands specifically, separated by what is seemingly an oil rig of sorts, maybe just some engineering sea structure, who knows. I'm sure a lot of you guys have played on fun servers over the years and are familiar with these islands. Many of those servers tend to place their malls or queue spots on these islands. They're pretty iconic. I also think this place is pretty epic for any duels that you want to include in maybe your PvP montage if that's your thing. Not the craziest secret location ever, but still cool and quite secluded. Great spot to enjoy the beach in peace, grab a tan, and maybe fish some oily blackmouth. At number 7, we've got the SHATTERSPEAR village at the top of the mountains in Darkshore. Similar to the IRONFORGE airfield, the SHATTERSPEAR village is a location within the game that was only added for sightseeing purposes during a flight path above the mountaintops. Regardless of that fact, however, you know that its secluded location with seemingly no obvious path to get there wouldn't be enough to stop the player base from breaking through and making it up against all odds. Through another wall jumping path near the Timbermaw Hold entrance in Winterspring, you could edge up the wall, eventually getting over the mountain line, dropping down the mountain edges Goku style till you drop down directly in the village itself using Slowfall. If you don't have Slowfall because you're not a mage or a priest, you can just use Noggenfogger Elixir. It's a small tribal troll village with a couple named NPCs and some regular mobs that are dancing by the lake. Definitely an interesting one, which a lot of people have experienced. It's not super hard to get there. I remember lots of people doing this during the original game. And a little interesting fact, but this spot isn't just a cool location. It's actually a decent farming location for Alliance mages. You can head there in your final levels, nearing to level 60, and they're all melee mobs, which makes it great for AoE farming. The mob density is also insane considering all of the partying trolls along the riverside are all condensed on top of each other. Once you clean those up and make your way to the end, you can kill all those on the other side of the village and then move back and wait for respawns. It's a completely secluded zone as well, so you always have the entire zone to yourself pretty much. The mobs are also all humanoids, so they drop a bunch of cloth, flat silver, and gray items which can sell for upwards of a gold apiece. And with number 6, you guys all know this one, we've got the Caverns of Time. So most people would say that the Caverns of Time was implemented during the game in the Burning Crusade, which is true, but the structure and layout was actually in the game during vanilla. That spot in Tanarus where Anachronis is supposedly guarding the entrance to the cavern held a great story of foreshadowing for what was to come. In vanilla, the gate to the cavern was locked by a runed stone door. There were a couple ways of getting through that gate, the first of which was to simply just die outside of the gate and res on the other side. I know, super difficult. Once inside the cave, you would quickly realize that it was one of the coolest places in WoW. The color palette was super interesting, and above the wall borders was an astronomical view of nebulae, asteroids floating, arcane energy. This place was teeming with magical presence. The way we know the cavern today, Nozdormu lies dormant within the center of the cave below, but in the vanilla days, that center platform is actually just a massive sand dune, with endless sand pouring down onto the platform symbolizing an hourglass's sand flow. The rest of the structure of the cavern is pretty much intact, not much has changed at all from expansion to expansion, and it started all in vanilla. And a lot of the instance portals were actually there back then as well. I remember the first time I learned about the inside of the cave, it was actually during a Swifty montage. So in Swifty's old school video, the first one, Swifty Incredible Warrior Tricks, in the ending credits, he had a shot of him within the cavern, which was mesmerizing at the time. Shout out Swifty, by the way. Go check out Swifty Incredible Warrior Tricks if you haven't seen the video already. Coming in at number 5, we've got the creepy KARAZHAN crypt. The KARAZHAN crypts. Deadwood Pass was pretty much a completely irrelevant zone in Classic WoW. It was just a pass, so to speak. That didn't stop eager adventurers from exploring every inch of this zone, which led to a great discovery, the KARAZHAN crypts, or the crypts. KARAZHAN has a very rich history within the lore of World of Warcraft. It's known as the Tower of Medivh. This tower was a conduit of magical power connected to the ley line. The tower was passed down to Medivh from his mother Aegwynn, as well as the powers of the Guardian. This was Medivh's enclave, and a little interesting fact, but Khadgar, the mage that we've seen throughout almost all the expansions, actually trained under Medivh's wing in KARAZHAN when he was a young blooming mage. I've always been a mage in WoW, and KARAZHAN happens to be one of my favorite raids and places in the game because of it. I believe there was a chance of KARAZHAN being released as a raid in vanilla originally. An outdated version of KARAZHAN was actually implemented in the game in Alpha Patch 0.8, but the raid never ended up happening, instead being released later on in TBC. The structure and landscape, however, has been in the game for a long time. Behind the Tower of Medivh is a crypt entrance. You used to be able to die on the outside of the gate and then res on the other side, so people had explored the crypt in vanilla. The crypt was a huge point of interest for the player base. Many speculated it was supposed to be a raid. It had a pretty extensive layout, quite massive in fact, and multi-leveled. It was home to one of the coolest discoveries in classic WoW, the room with the upside down sinners. This underwater room was filled with massive chains dangling from wall to wall, with floating corpses attached to the chains themselves. I remember vividly exploring this place in the old game. It was a great experience. Back during that time, I always expected an underground crypt raid to release, but this location unfortunately was never actually utilized. One of the most special ones out of this list, coming in at number 4, we've got the Deep Run Tram Aqua Tank. The Deep Run Tram Aqua Tank. This is one of my favorites by far. I won't go over exactly how it is that you could get to this location for a bunch of different reasons, or how you were able to do it in the past, but in the original client, there was ways to get through the glass wall in the Deep Run Tram and get onto the other side, the underwater side of the Deep Run Tram. I found a couple videos uploaded 10 years ago, even over 10 years ago, to confirm this, and I've also seen someone on the other side of the glass myself in retail. It was a super long time ago. I'm not sure if it was TBC, Vanilla, or Wrath of the Lich King, who knows, but I remember asking them and saying, like, just non-stop whispering, they're like, please tell me how you got there, and they kept that as a secret away from me. Mysterious. So underwater there's chests, gnomes with scuba gear, a shipwreck, massive seaweed flowing through the waves, sharks, and of course the crown jewel, Nessie, the Loch Ness monster swimming about underwater. She's not actually killable. She's targetable but not killable, unfortunately. So if you do get over and get into the water, you can't get world first Nessie kill. But nonetheless, pretty epic. Overall, just an epic place to get to. Don't blame me if you get banned though. At number 3, this one's a bit cheesy, but we got the GM Island and the Designer/Programmer Islands. These two locations are Blizzard staff locations. The GM Island is exactly that. It's just a spot where GMs can hang out outside of the general zones in the game. This spot was actually discovered in retail by the player base. I remember people successfully getting there somehow. I have no idea how, but they definitely got there, and it resulted in a very swift ban on their account. This spot is way off of the world from a geographical perspective, surrounded by water and a bounding box that you can't pass through. I'm sure most of you guys already know about this one. It's not super interesting, just a random island with a building on it and a dock. The Programmer and Designer Islands were testing grounds for, you guessed it, designers and programmers of the game. There's a ton of assets scattered around randomly throughout the landscape, some set up in what seems to be maybe like a structure for testing some sort of raid mechanic or something. There's like some craters and all kinds of random buildings and random things all across the landscape. There's a bunch of massive geostructures that are entirely gray shaded, meaning that no textures have been applied to the actual 3D pieces themselves, or I guess they haven't been painted yet if you aren't aware of 3D art lingo. Some of these gray structures are absolutely massive, and I can't necessarily point out whether I've seen them used in any location in the game, well, ever. Seems they were probably testing something, but maybe scrapped it along the way and never ended up using it. It's basically a game dev playground, really cool, and it gives us some insight on what the environment is like working on a 3D game of such a large scale. Oh, and check out this headless chicken of a statue. Can someone in the comment sections maybe tell me if this statue's ever been used anywhere? I can't necessarily locate it from just a visual. Coming in at number 2, this one's a vast landscape, the Zone of Hyjal. The journey to Mount Hyjal was one of the most legendary adventures of all time in World of Warcraft. There's this one zone in North Kalimdor which has a really large surface area. It was one of the bigger zones in Azeroth. If you hovered your mouse on the map above it, however, it wouldn't highlight at all. This zone was locked out and unavailable to the public in Classic. With a clever path in mind and the use of wall jumping in the 1.12 client, it was possible to get above a mountain ridge and slow fall into Mount Hyjal, bypassing that lockout and exploring the zone in its entirety. It was a vast, mountainous terrain with massive pits, as well as carved paths along the mountainsides overlooking those pits. The zone was filled with tons of interesting assets and areas which gave way to massive speculation from the player base. The zone transitioned from lush green forests to charred wastelands. One of the most notable locations discovered in Hyjal was the Hyjal Crater, which was a massive blown-out landscape in one of the areas encompassed within the zone. I believe this massive charred crater was actually caused by Baron Geddon himself. Someone didn't step out of the raid with the bomb, I guess. What I remember being the most fascinating about my explorations in Hyjal all those years ago was an Onyxia-style raid entrance at the bottom of one of the pits. Not only did the raid entrance feel so epic down in the depths like that, but the idea of having a massive new zone with potential raids within it got me so excited as a kid. Unfortunately though, this part of Hyjal was never utilized. What most would probably regard as the crown jewel of the Hyjal discoveries, however, was the World Tree. which had the bony remains of Archimonde himself entwined at the roots of the tree. This visual was so captivating for so many reasons, especially to those who understood the significance of it within the story of World of Warcraft. There were little construction barriers in this area as well, indicating that the zone was currently in development for something epic in the potentially near future. I will personally never forget venturing here as a kid with a group of my online friends in Ventrilo, riding our mounts as a cavalry, amazed by the optics and abundance of assets foreshadowing what was possible within the zone and for the future of World of Warcraft. A good amount of the structure of the zone has remained intact in transition to the raid on Mount Hyjal and the Burning Crusade, although a lot was left out since it was an instance raid solely within the Caverns of Time. And finally, at number 1, this one is pretty unattainable. I don't think you could actually get there, but it's one of the coolest ones, and I had to put it at number 1 because of just the effect that it had on the player base and how excited everyone was for this to potentially actually become something in the game. We've got the Emerald Dream. There's no actual footage that I can find of people entering the Emerald Dream on the 1.12 client, but despite that, we know that it was definitely hidden within the game at the time. We have these quotes from 2003 to 2006 from some of the developers. Let's go through them really quick. Teagle on December 6, 2003 said, "Actually, we have some pretty cool stuff planned for druids. They will definitely have a link to the Emerald Dream. There's also a zone on the way to the peak of Mount Hyjal called Moonglade that will be the very core of druid characters. Our Master of Warcraft lore, Chris Metzen, is never short of ideas when it comes to the druid class. I was running around the Emerald Dream last Thursday. You guys are in for a treat. The level designers are doing a killer job." Teagle also said on that same day, "The Emerald Dream is shaping up to be extremely cool. We don't want to preview any of that content yet as it is endgame and we want some surprises for players. The zone is massive and beautiful, and once the content team is done with it, it'll be exceedingly challenging." So he's even alluding that it would be a raid, a specifically challenging raid. So it was definitely planned to be late game content. On September 6, 2006, Nathera said, "As for the Emerald Dream, there are no plans for anything as of yet, but it is in consideration for the future. The Emerald Dream opens up a lot of different opportunities, and the Burning Crusade is definitely not going to be the last of the expansion packs. There are many different places and storylines that can be pursued. The story is going to keep growing, and as it does, people will get to experience it." When private servers became a more popular thing, so late 2006, people started launching their own personal clients with GM privileges, and videos started to emerge of this beautiful, fluorescent, vibrant landscape. The Emerald Dream has a deep lore involving Malfurion, Ysera, and the Emerald Dragons who guard the portals to the Emerald Dream. In the 1.12 client, there's 4 Emerald portals, one in Duskwood, one in Fairless, one in Ashenvale, and another one in the Hinterlands. These portals are guarded by the Emerald Dragons, which are world bosses available to kill for epic loot in Classic WoW. I heard of rumors that the Emerald Dream was supposed to release as a raid in the Legion expansion. I didn't personally play Legion, so I'm not 100% sure. And I think there was a raid called the Emerald Nightmare. Maybe there's some sort of correlation. Maybe it was a replacement of the Emerald Dream, but definitely no Emerald Dream in Legion, from what I understand. Still though, it's just not the same if it was released in the modern version of the game. Getting the Emerald Dream in vanilla or TBC would have been legendary in my opinion. I remember the Emerald Dream being a huge topic in Classic WoW. It was a place that I personally always dreamed about being released in the old versions of the game. I remember the first video that came out leaking the environment was so mesmerizing. It's definitely one of the biggest disappointments for me in World of Warcraft. There's definitely a little bit of a void in my soul for the Emerald Dream and what it could have been back in the day.